Hey folks, welcome to Friday afternoon's live stream here on Effective Remote Work. My name is Justin. Thanks for joining so much today. Had a little bit of a get-go or difficulty getting going this afternoon. Apparently, Streamlabs OBS decided to do an update as soon as I opened it, so that was super fun. Anyway, I wanted to let everybody know before we get started that we have a brand new Discord community. I mentioned it in this week's video. I'll be talking about it in next week's podcast process, and then I'll post a link in the chat here as well to the Discord community. It's completely free, so if you'd like to join up over there, I want to continue some of this fun, more ephemeral connection with people through Discord like we're having here on the live stream. So if you're interested in doing that, we will be meeting over there. So feel free to join up. Anyway, today during the live stream, I wanted to do a little bit of a continuation from last week in the productivity work that I was doing inside of Obsidian. Just kind of giving you an update on where that system stands and how it looks, and especially some of the review workflows that I am working through at this point in time. Other than that, I think we'll probably dive into a little bit, if we get some time, into just some Obsidian Zettelkasten and Evergreen Note type work as well. So hang out, shoot any questions that you have into the chat, and we'll just get flowing here. I'm going to switch over to my screen and mute my audio apparently on my laptop because I have all the stuff going on. I have YouTube open in the background with all that. Rishab, yeah, a fancy iPad I have going on there. I do have an iPad sitting back over here. Apparently I forgot to turn it off. Oh, my mic's kind of quiet? Okay, I think something got messed up with my settings. Maybe compression got turned off. I think that's probably what happened. Let me take a look here. Something got messed up today in Streamlabs when I was messing with it, so please stand by. Thanks for pointing that out, Brian, by the way. Take a look. Filters. Okay. Interesting. Just boost it at the source. I just turned it up on my preamp. Let me know if that is any louder. Make sure that that's working. I did have to do some jiggering around with it in Streamlabs before jumping on the stream, so something must have happened there. We'll get it all sorted out, though. Okay. Just making sure, too, that I've got the correct settings on here as well. I'm using filters instead of Streamlabs OBS, which allows you to input in some like limiters and compressors and stuff to boost the audio. So that's kind of funny. So Brian's saying his music got botched on Mac with a weird desktop capture in Streamlabs. Audio is a pain sometimes. Yes, it is. I've got a background in doing a lot of audio stuff too, just on the side. I love music, and I do some music production as well. And so I've got a nice rig here with the Shure Beta 87 microphone, and then I've got a Focusrite Scarlett 2i4, and then a Presonus Studio Channel preamp, which is nice. But yeah, I agree. Macs and audio capture can be a challenge. Let me check my settings too. If I can actually like navigate around. Okay, maybe that's what's happening. Input is wrong there. Is that better? Can you guys hear me a little bit more clearly now? Good, bad? Let me know. Sorry for the issues. But, all right. One thing I'm going to do today is I do want to go through this recurring system maintenance. Yes, I love Alfred. It's awesome, Brian. It's I miss it on Linux, to be honest. I've enjoyed a lot of Alfred on the Mac, but I've got my Linux machine. And yeah. Okay, cool. Glad to hear the audio is good. Thank you guys for the feedback. I really appreciate it. I'm just going to dive into the system that I have going here. Last week on the live stream, I talked about largely setting this up here and the flow that I have for my information that gets into not only Obsidian, but also my task system and such. Is I've got this inflow, which is anything that's coming from the outside. Then triage, which is the stuff that I've deemed important to me that I need to process and put it somewhere inside the system, and then integration into the system somewhere, whether that's in Obsidian or Todoist or one of the other tools that I'm using. And so then I've got, this is the list of tools that I'm using, and I've been working on slowly developing this out over the last couple of weeks. Inflows, triage buckets, places that I'm checking, system structure, and lastly, the one thing that I've been working on this week is recurring system maintenance. So I wanted to dive into Todoist really quick to show you how I've got this set up. Just basically to give you a brief overview of how I'm using this in my system. I don't have this all sorted out yet, but one thing that I've been loving about Todoist is the sections now. So one thing I can do is I can create a section for daily tasks, weekly tasks, monthly tasks, seasonal, and annual. Side note here, Brian, I'm really glad to hear that the recovery is going well. Not fun to have to go through stuff there. I think Brian has more information probably over on his channel, but definitely be sure to check that out if you haven't yet. But how I'm handling these recurring maintenance tasks inside of Todoist, and the whole point of this is that a system, a productivity system, whether that's on the note-taking side or a task management, project management, it requires intentional investment to keep it up to date. If your system gets out of date, it means you can't trust it anymore. And when you don't trust your system, you don't use it. And so it's important to tend to your system like you would a garden. You've got to pull the weeds out. You've got to dive in and see what you actually want in there, organize it. Also, you've got to, if you've gardened, my wife and I gardened for the very first time this year, you can't overplant it too. So that's kind of a thing. So you have to tend to it properly, and you've got to organize it and make sure that everything is up to date inside of your productivity system that you're using. So the way that I break this down is I generally have it in cycles. I've got things that I need to do on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, seasonally, and annually. That's why I have those sections here. I haven't fully filled this out yet. This is more of the maintenance workflows that I have and less of the creative planning, look and dream to the future type workflows that I like to implement as well. So this is largely just the maintenance stuff because this is what I need to get down now. So first and foremost, on the daily side of things, I've got to process my daily inboxes to triage. So I have these inboxes over here kind of split up into daily, weekly, and monthly levels because not everything is important to check every single day. And I need to make sure that I have this kind of split out. And so what I'm doing to do that is I've got these different tasks. So daily, I have a few different inboxes and I'm triaging a couple of different forums, my daily log and the bullet journal, the Todoist inbox, the today view, and so on. Then I have the item to process those triage items. So the items that end up into my Obsidian inbox or end into my Todoist inbox, somewhere into the system where I know I'm going to find them and see them at a later point in time. So basically what I'm doing daily is I'm just clearing out my Todoist inbox. Lastly, or on the weekly level, I'm processing out my rapid log in the bullet journal. So I rapid log in the bullet journal on a daily basis. I kind of just note down the tasks for the day and capture ideas if I don't capture it into Todoist. So I'm migrating those into my digital task database. If they haven't gotten done in a week, more than likely they need to get scheduled at some point in the future. So that's why they're ending up in Todoist. Then I'm looking through my Obsidian daily notes, which I don't use too much these days. I use drafts on my iPhone and iPad to primarily capture a lot of stuff that I'm reading, especially if I'm reading away from the computer. So I'm trying to migrate that into my Obsidian database. And then lastly, I'm just checking into YouTube Studio and clearing out comments and things like that, make sure I've replied to people. From there, I'm processing those triage items, those important items, into the system somewhere. So I'm looking at my Obsidian inbox, which I have an inbox folder back here, and then I'm taking a look at my calendar as well. So it looks like there's some chat going on over here. Rashab says, question for you both, since you're both familiar with Linux, have you guys had any experience with Emacs? Well, yes, a little bit. I've tried getting into Emacs before. For some reason, just the whole system didn't quite connect with me. I'm a Vim user. I do a lot of my development inside of Vim. I'm actually looking at switching over to VS Code with Vim embedded inside of it, just because some of the out-of-the-box VS Code features are really nice to have. You don't have to configure them with plugins and potentially have issues with that. But Emacs and Emacs org mode, if you're willing to get through the learning curve, are an amazing productivity software. I mean, there's people who praise that up and down, left and right. Let's see. I will post the Discord link again. Sorry for that's there. Let's see. I'll post it here. There's the Discord link in the chat again. Let's see. I'll catch up on chat here real quick. Emacs isn't a text editor. It's a list-driven operating system. A Lisp-driven operating system. You're totally right. Once you get into Emacs, you can't get out of it. You start pulling your entire life and workflow into it, from what I understand, because it's possible to, which is pretty amazing. I personally like using more graphical interfaces than that, just myself. I'm more visual, but I do have an affinity for some of these efficient command line tools like Vim. So not a huge Emacs fan, but definitely a Vim fan, fanboy here. Definitely trying to incorporate more stuff like that into my life because it's nice. Back into the system workflows here. So on the weekly basis, processing triage into the system, mentioned that I look at my Obsidian inbox. I'm looking there to try to process the notes that I've captured over that week. And then I'm also looking at my calendar, both back a couple weeks and forward a couple weeks, just to see if there's any outstanding things that I need to do or prepare for. And I'll try to capture those into my task manager from there. Then on a monthly basis, I am processing my paper tray, which I haven't done for a very long time. I'm trying to make sure that I'm doing this on a regular basis, just scanning information that I need to keep, putting it in the appropriate places. And then those triage items is I'm processing my raindrop queue and then Dropbox inbox. Basically what I'm trying to do here is just give myself a relatively easy and maintainable cadence for doing these things. Now, I might be going through raindrop and clearing my read later list and to clear my process list out of there on a more frequent basis. But at least on a monthly basis, I can go in and then try to clear those out. And then I've got a folder inside of Dropbox where I kind of capture documents and stuff. And again, I haven't cleared that out for quite a while. On a seasonal and annual basis, this is more of the get creative and plan type viewpoint that I try to get to a few times a year. Seasonally, or about every quarter, I try to take a look at the strategic view of things. I take a look again at kind of the overarching theme for the year and say, am I making progress in that area? Do I need to intentionally invest in some other areas? And then I try to actively work towards those things. And then on an annual basis, I like to do an annual review. That's generally where I will set my theme for the year. I'll also look back on the previous year and kind of pull out what went well, what didn't go so well, what I should keep doing, what I should stop doing. And then really just try to get a big picture dream about like where effective remote work is, where my career is, where my family is, and try to see like what might be possible for me to pursue in the future. Starting this YouTube channel, starting my podcast process, are each items that came out of those annual reviews in the last couple of years. Just giving myself that ability and that space to dream and think and be creative about what I want to do with the future, I think is a really powerful thing. Even if I don't do anything that comes out of those lists, I think it's a really powerful thing to do just because it gives me more perspective, really. It gives me a lot of perspective on what's possible for the future. So that's really it on the recurring system maintenance. One quick little thing that I'm doing here too for planning today's focus is I literally just have a checkbox. Like I make a square inside of my bullet journal and write down like the one thing that I want to focus on for that day, or at least the one big thing that I need to get done. And then at the end of the day, if I get it done, I get to check it off. And if I don't, then I don't check it off. It's pretty easy and straightforward to kind of keep track. Then at least when I come back to that in the future, I can say, oh, maybe I've been having an off week here or something like that. So to answer your question, Rashab, he's asking, out of curiosity, what do I do outside of this channel? I'm assuming that I have a day job as well. Yes, I do. Currently, I work for Discourse. We're a company that makes forum software, and we just launched a new team-oriented product as well. I work as a technical advocate there, so I handle some customer support as well as some of our developer stuff. I work a lot on custom plugins for Discourse, and then I'm working a little bit more into developing in core Discourse as well. So we primarily develop in JavaScript using the Ember framework for the front end of the application, and then Ruby on Rails for the back end. Both of those frameworks I really like. They're kind of fun. But that is what I do. And then productivity stuff is really just a passion of mine, and so that's why I'm doing it on the side here. I've been running a community and doing a podcast for the last couple of years now, and I've really enjoyed it. Yeah, it is kind of fancy. I've been enjoying it a lot, actually. The cool thing about Discourse is that we're 100% remote, so everybody works from all over the world. We have flexible schedules. We work asynchronously, so we're not in a lot of meetings all the time, which has been fantastic. And actually, like, in the last few years, I've gotten a passion for this type of remote asynchronous work. I was a manager in a company previous to working for Discourse, and I was doing that completely remotely, and just trying to figure out, like, how do I be productive as a person who's leading other people and do that effectively, to do it well, to actually take care of people in that process. And that time in my life really actually got me very passionate about this remote work and productivity thing. And so that's kind of why I originally had this business. It was under a different brand. I acquired it from someone else, and then I have moved it. I rebranded it last summer because I just felt like it was the best thing to do, because that's the direction I wanted to take it. It was still based on productivity. And obviously on this YouTube channel, we talk a lot about Obsidian and note-taking workflows. But one of the other things I would like to do in the future is more, do some more. I'll switch over to my camera here because I'm just talking right now. One of the other things that I would like to do in the future is talk a little bit more about broader productivity workflows, look at task management, goal management, also like how do you be productive as a remote worker. I know a lot of people with the COVID-19 pandemic have transitioned into doing more remote work, and it seems like lots of companies are transitioning to that model more permanently. And so the mode of remote working, I mean, for one, there's still this divide between like synchronous remote work and then asynchronous remote work. They're two different company cultures, and synchronous remote work is a lot more like being in the office was, because people just generally jumped on WebEx or Zoom calls all day long anyway, just from their desk versus from home. But when you're working asynchronously, there's a lot of different unique challenges to working remotely. Yeah, Brian, the Obsidian forums are on Discourse. Actually, it's one of the reasons that I got really heavily drawn to their software, is because, oh, they're using Discourse. They're pretty cool. But yeah, it's a really powerful way to, I love Discourse. I mean, obviously I work there, but I had a passion for that software prior to even joining the company. It's pretty great. I think one of the cool things about it is that, like, compared to chat, You have chat. If you can think of your chat like a short-term memory. So even for a community like the Discord community that we're launching this week, it's more of an ephemeral, short-term place where conversations can happen. People can get help in real time. But then you can translate that information into like a long-term storage where people can come back and refer to it into discourse. That's kind of the way that we think about it as far as building the software and interacting with chat, is that if you think of chat like your short-term memory and discourse like your long-term memory, they work really well together. Yeah, Obsidian is really good for the algorithm, Brian. But I've been, like I mentioned, I'm trying to make this change and a little bit of shift because I love Obsidian. I love talking about personal knowledge management. It's something that I've gotten actually very passionate about in the last couple of years. The other thing that I want to, as I mentioned, want to start talking about more is more productivity and remote work stuff. I do have a remote work podcast called Remotely Working, if you catch that play on words in there. I've kind of put that one on hold just due to time constraints for myself. But one thing I'm trying to do, and I'm going to do starting next week, is at least periodically have guests on to live stream on YouTube here. So we can have conversations about remote work and productivity, and then at least kind of have that here on the YouTube channel as well. So be watching for that. The first one is up next week on Wednesday. I think middle of the afternoon, about 2 o'clock Central Time. So 12 o'clock Pacific, 3 o'clock Eastern, and then other times all around the world. But yeah, that's kind of just the idea of where my vision for where I want to take the channel. Like, it's been really narrowly focused on Obsidian lately because there's a lot to cover, honestly, in that area. And besides, it's given me a good excuse to dive in and dig in to the software as well as learn personal knowledge management a lot better than I did previously. But yeah, that's kind of a summary of the channel, and then also talking about the productivity system as well. I think what I'm going to do next is we're just going to kind of hang out, and I'm going to work through some of my Obsidian inbox here, process some of the notes that I have, and see if I can craft any permanent notes today. Maybe I can, maybe I can't. I guess we'll find out, see how that goes. We'll switch back into the screen here. And let me know if things need to be bigger on the screen too. I've done some. That's way too squished for me. But so if you guys can't see that, let me know and I'll figure it out. I will say that I have been really enjoying the third-party plugins that you can add into Obsidian pretty easily now. As you can see, I've got Andy mode here, and then the calendar, which I'm not using. I think it's a really cool idea, but I haven't been using daily notes nearly as much lately. But I'm going to get into some notes here. This is a pretty simple video that I saw. It was like a minute long. If you haven't checked out Simon Sinek, he is an awesome leadership author. And one thing he said in this video is that like we tend to broadcast ourselves, which is much different than being authentic. So even me talking to you about productivity and my life on here, I can be real about it, but it's not necessarily being authentic and vulnerable. It's more me broadcasting to you what's going on in my life. And he equates it to like in social media, like just saying I feel sad on social media is not the equivalent of being vulnerable, but being vulnerable happens in interpersonal relationships. So I can open up to somebody and be completely honest with them about how I'm feeling, what I'm doing, what I'm going through in life. But the cool thing that I pulled out of this is his definition of love, which is to give someone else the absolute power to destroy your life and that they will not use it. I just thought it really stood out to me as something powerful. And he talks about empathy a lot in context of leadership, that leaders need to be more empathetic, that leadership is about taking care of people and to create an environment where people they feel safe, where they can be vulnerable about how they're really actually doing, is one that's healthy for a work culture because it builds trust for one, And two, it just allows people to be people instead of widgets and cogs in a machine. And so I really, really liked that. I am not really seeing any notes out of this one. So I am going to, I think what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to link this anyway. And then what I'm going to do is I'll source it. Then I'm just going to tag it incubating, because I know there's something eventually what I want to come back to in this, but I also know that at the moment it's not really clicking right now. There's definitely a topic here that I want to hit, but again, it's just not coming. So I'll incubate that one for a while. I'll leave it here in my inbox. I'll move this one to my root notes. So this particular topic, Rashad was saying, is something that's being heavily discussed at my company as well, and I definitely feel that creating that space for people is more important now than it ever has been. I fully 100% agree. In fact, with working remotely and with that shift, that dispersion of work out from the office due to the pandemic, people, and not to mention the pressures that get added on top of you due to the pandemic, it's really put a lot of companies in a place where they realize that they can't take emotional and mental health of their employees for granted. I mean, really, because we used to kind of live in this bubble where you kept your personal life and everything that's going on inside of you at home, and then you came to work and you just got the job done. But you can't separate those two because you can't compartmentalize people. If people, hey, Brian, thanks for joining. Enjoy your video editing and all the work that you're doing. Looking forward to more content that you're pushing out. You always got good stuff, good things to say, so appreciate it. But back on that topic, you can't compartmentalize people. People are very holistic in nature. Say somebody has a fight with their spouse or they're having a rough time with their children, that is definitely going to affect them at work. Then when you put the pressures of the pandemic and working at home, now you don't get to see people as much. You don't get to interact with your office coworkers as much in a spontaneous and social manner. You have to spend infinitely more time in meetings because companies aren't making the transition to asynchronous work. They're still saying synchronous. They're just spending it all in Zoom and WebEx calls all day long. That really impacts a person's ability to effectively do work. Physical health is one thing. If you are physically healthy, you definitely get the benefit of having more productive days. It's just true. You have more energy, more mental clarity when you're physically healthy. But that's not the only thing. When you are mentally and emotionally healthy and you're working through processes to become more so, because we can all grow in those areas. Emotional health is one of the things too that I have been extremely passionate about in learning in my own life, being able to recognize my own feelings, to be able to process them, to share them with other people in safe settings, and to be able to move through them. You have to have a safe and vulnerable environment for that. And if people don't feel safe, if they can't be vulnerable, even in their interpersonal relationships outside of work, then that kind of hinders that process to be able to move through and identify feelings and stay at a place of higher emotional and mental health. So what do I mean by synchronous versus asynchronous with regards to remote work? Okay, so I'm just going to create a new note. Synchronous. This means, and I'm just going to blow it up here, even though it's going to totally ruin my screen, but that's okay. Synchronous for remote work means you're all working at the same time. So say everybody is in the office from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. and you're generally in similar time zones, or you have coworkers who are in, say New York, then maybe you have some coworkers who are in Australia, and then you might have to spend some time, because you're working on the same project, jumping on calls at ridiculous hours of the day to stay synchronous. It tends to be very meeting and call dependent. And so basically, it just means you're doing work at the same time as everybody else. And there's a lot of companies that, this is just the traditional way that companies have worked. Asynchronous, to contrast that, is it tends to have flexible schedules. Also tends to not require meetings, because it's very heavily text dependent and written communication. So at Discourse, we're an asynchronous organization. What that means for us is that we're not generally on meetings. I have one meeting a week that all of my coworkers and I get on and just kind of share how we're going through the week, type of things that we're working on, and so on. But the rest of the week, all of our work communication takes place in two places. One, we have a chat software that we use, and that's helpful for things that are just happen better in a synchronous fashion, such as, hey, stuff is completely falling apart here. We've got a bug or a big error or issue on our hosting, so we've got to fix that. Getting in a synchronous environment is much easier to work in when you're handling that. But generally, the software that we use is Discourse. So we use Discourse to make Discourse at Discourse. That's a lot of discourses there, isn't it? But one of the things we do is we tend to focus on long form writing. So instead of words and short little sentences and bursts of thought that end up in Slack or whatever chat software it is, we tend to emphasize paragraphs and communicating whole ideas. The thing that this allows inside of our organization is people to work from any time zone. And you're not expected to be signed in on chat from 8 o'clock to 5 p.m. During the day. Instead, you sign into Discourse, you read through the topics that are there, you respond to the ones that are important for you to respond to, and you figure out what you need to do for the day, and you get to work. You don't have to worry about necessarily being present with everybody there. So, for example, the benefit of this for me right now, we've had some changes, and I have to share the load of childcare with my wife, with her job and my job. And so what I have to do with that is I end up having to, kind of work flexible hours. And so I can work later in the evening, I can work early in the morning, I can work interspersed throughout the day, and I don't have to worry about being signed in or present. So that's kind of the deal there. So Rashab is saying, I feel that if you're working asynchronously, it's easier to facilitate synchronous work when needed, but not really the other way around. I think that's exactly right. It's much easier to live in a mode of asynchronous work and then hop into synchronous communication when it's necessary. But when everything needs to be synced up, it kind of creates a culture of urgency where you get text messages and chat messages and emails at all hours of the day. There's, not necessarily an explicit communication that happens, but it's kind of implied that if you get an email at 11 o'clock at night, you're expected to respond to it in a reasonable amount of time or a very short amount of time. I know that there are a lot of companies where that's the case, and if you miss that, then people are going to be upset. But that's not necessarily the case with asynchronous work. Work has to go a little bit slower asynchronously too. If you're looking at the turnaround on things, it can take a little bit longer to get feedback. But the upside of it is that when you work asynchronously and you have a globally distributed organization, what ends up happening is that you have people who can work on it 24 hours of the day instead of just the 8 to 10 hours that you have in the middle of the day. Do you find that synchronous culture is more prevalent in larger companies? I would say yes at this point in time, just because that's traditionally the way that work has been done. And larger companies have a lot more bureaucracy and policy and things that they need to sort through and figure out, legal stuff as well, that it just takes a long time to change culture. Plus, not only, in a smaller organization, you might have to get a buy-in from the owner of the company, plus maybe a couple managers to make a transition to more asynchronous work. When you have an entire organization, say like Microsoft level, you have to get buy-in from an entire executive leadership team, as well as middle management and stuff to make it work successfully. Because you have to transition asynchronously, you not only need to just change the tooling and the ways you're approaching work, but the whole culture towards work has to change in your organization as well. So do I journal or brainstorm project ideas on Obsidian, or do I use it exclusively for Zettelkasten? Fantastic question. Right now, I am kind of experimenting with using it for that as well. The trick that I'm having issues with is because I want to publish the majority of my Zettelkasten notes, but I don't necessarily want to publish my project ideas and such. I do a little bit of journaling in here, but I primarily do most of my journaling on paper. I've got a bullet journal here that I've got. This one's getting almost empty, but I don't do a lot of like extensive long form journaling. A lot of what I do is more writing out bullets of this is what happened today. This is something that was important to me, and so on. I don't do a lot of journaling outside of that, so the bullet journal works really well for that. Plus, I've discussed previously on different videos that I like the fact that paper is something that is more permanent, I guess. I don't have to worry about backing it up, and if a computer dies or if something happens and somebody's got to figure out how to access that stuff if I'm not around anymore or something like that, I want to be able to have that journal type stuff available for other people to look at and glean from in the future. That being said, I do a little bit of capturing and thought and processing and brainstorming inside of Obsidian. Sometimes that starts in daily notes, where I'll just create a note for the day and start writing. Other times what will happen is I will get into my project structure. I'm gonna take this off the screen here real quick, just to make sure that I don't have anything sensitive to pull it up. But let's see. Yeah, I don't have anything in here right now. I haven't gotten that far. This is one of the items that I have on my list for building out my system a little bit more, as I've got this planning map of content. This is just a structural note inside of the database, the vault. My plan is here to have just a link to my current system so that I can go back to that and revise it as I need to. I have spots where I can flesh out my yearly themes, my someday maybe items, if you're familiar with that from Getting Things Done. These are things that are out in the future that don't have a necessarily any sort of a timeline with them. But they're things that I want to keep track of, that I can come back to and either pull into something actionable now or later on. And then under the strategic level, this just is more projects. As I mentioned, I haven't really gotten into this right now. But some of the things I've been doing has been planning out my weekly videos in here, and also planning out some of the podcasts that I'm doing as well. I still have a lot of that stuff up in the air of how I'm doing it. But a lot of it has to do with markdown tables. If you're familiar with writing markdown tables, it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. At least I can never remember the syntax for it, but there is an awesome plugin called Advanced Markdown Tables that you can install in Obsidian, and it does a lot of cool stuff for you automatically. I'll show you real quick. So, I mean, just from the commands in here, you can delete rows, move them up and down, delete columns, move them around, open a control toolbar for table. If you say, let's say if I do this. So if I just hit tab, if I start typing the table syntax here, so what I did is just a pipe character, column, and then I hit tab. Then it'll automatically create this data here. So it just fills it out. So I get another pipe character, column 2, tab. Now I have a table, headings. Then what I can do here is just hit enter. And this is all in that advanced tables plugin. And then I can just say data, tab, go to the next column, data, so on and so forth. And if I preview that, then I get a nice table here. So super handy for some of the work that I'm doing, that plugin is. If you are frustrated with Markdown tables at all, definitely recommend checking it out. Rashab is asking, do I keep a notion of a content calendar for my channel or podcast? If so, is that in Obsidian also? So this is kind of the funny thing about stuff, is I was really diligent about keeping a content calendar. I'm trying to plan out at least a few weeks in advance the type of content and the videos that I was planning on doing. With just some of the changes in my life recently, I've reverted a little bit more to just kind of going week by week, seeing what is happening in the Obsidian space and the productivity space, and just trying to talk through that. I don't schedule out super far unless it's an interview with somebody. Then I try to schedule out at least a couple weeks in advance to give them time to prepare and myself time to prepare as well. Where I was keeping that was in Notion, because I love the view. Let me pull it up for you and I can show you what that looks like. Oh, look, there is that. Here's the chat, by the way. Thanks for everybody who's joining. Appreciate it a lot. I'm going to pull up my content calendar inside of Notion so you can see what that looked like. Here it is. All right. So get rid of that other window here. This is how I had it working in Notion, and I've just kind of tailed off my usage of Notion a little bit over time. I love the application. I think it's very powerful, especially in regards to trying to plan content like this and looking at the content that you have. But so what I was doing in here, I was just honestly having a difficult time staying in it, because I like to consolidate tools as much as possible instead of having them widely disparate over lots of different tools, all that information. And so I'm trying to figure out if I can move this into Obsidian at some point. I guess we'll see how that works. So yeah, largely this content calendar, the way that I had this set up is I have at the top here just kind of my my content of when it's generally coming out. So the YouTube videos weekly on Wednesdays, my remotely working podcast bi-weekly on Mondays, process my other podcasts bi-weekly on Mondays, and then newsletter weekly on Thursdays. So then I also have templates in here too, to where I can pull in lots of different templated checklists and things for that, which honestly I never used. It was a good idea, but I never actually used it. And then, newsletter format and so on and so forth. I'm starting to do writing of my newsletters inside of Obsidian. I think it makes a lot of sense, especially considering the linking and unlinked references as well. If I'm sharing information, it's a good idea and be able to kind of tie those together inside of the vault. But again, that kind of comes to the question of I've been wrestling. Do I keep all of my stuff in the same vault, or do I split it out into a couple of different ones? The thought that I've had is to have a main vault where everything lives, including my Zettelkasten, and then to have a publish vault to where I can create special structure and such in there so that it's easier to find these Edelkosten items that I am publishing. And then there's no chance of me accidentally publishing stuff that I would prefer to keep private to my Obsidian publish site. That's kind of the wrestle that I have right now, but it is really nice to have it all in one place at this point in time. I don't have to copy it over to a different vault. I can just publish selectively the stuff that I have, but I guess we'll see how that works in the long term. Back to Obsidian. So this other article that I read recently, and I realized I didn't copy the link to it, so I'm going to have to go back into here. Here it is. This was kind of cool to read and work through. There's this guy, Shane O'Mara, who has written a book that is about walking and how just simply walking places makes us healthier, happier, and brainier. And I pulled a couple of interesting tidbits from this article: that our senses are most active when we're moving around. Physical activity prior to creativity is powerful. When you're physically active before you need to be creative, that it engages your brain in a different way than if you're just coming in cold. And that a healthy walking speed is 5 kilometers an hour, sustained over 30 minutes or more. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And again, there's some stuff here I think that is helpful. I think probably this note makes sense as a permanent note. I'm going to template it here. Reference is going to be physical activity. Oh, no, that's the note I just created. Walking makes us happier. Okay. And then topics, walking, creativity. And yeah, I'm just going to spend a second writing some thoughts down here. Feel free to comment in the chat if you have any questions. Okay. I'm going to take a drink here too. Let's see. Physical activity prior to creativity is powerful. Now, granted, I didn't read the book here on this one, so I don't have a lot of the study information that's available, but this is the general idea that I wanted to get out of this. It's a very, very short note. I could definitely come back and expand upon this if I choose to read this book by this guy, but that'll be on my list at some point in the future. I've got a number of books that I'm reading right now. But yeah, I think that kind of does that. I can look through my permanent notes and see if there's anywhere that matches up right now. I don't think so. Probably not. This one comes close, but it's not really exactly what I'm looking for. So that one will just probably end up back in the root, not linked to anything yet. So Juan is saying, I'm really curious about how I can change my default purple color into an orange like yours. Not willing to waste your time. Well, by no means are you wasting my time. Part of these live streams are not for me to just do work. It's to interact with you. So your question is very welcome. I will show you exactly how to change that. So in Obsidian, this is a third-party theme called Grovebox. It's something that I really like. So if you go under, I believe it's community themes here. It's set to dark mode only right now, but these are just themes that have dark modes. Grovebox, you can just search for Grovebox, Gruvbox, the Obsidian Grovebox theme. If you click on Use, then this will go back. If you go back into Appearance, you have to turn on Custom CSS here too, first and foremost. So turn on Custom CSS, go to Community Themes, Grovebox, hit Use, and then there are two modes for Grovebox. I am not a fan at all of light mode Grovebox. As you can see, it's very yellow, and I don't like that. It reminds me of a manila folder. But I love dark mode Grovebox. So if you flip dark mode, this is how you get the colors here. So yeah, and you can totally, as Security is saying, you can write your own CSS if you know how to do that. You can make your own themes. It's pretty great. So Rashab is asking, do I find myself usually taking notes on stuff while reading or after? So I tend to separate it in two different ways. I tend to take literature notes while I'm reading. So I am actively writing down thoughts about what I'm reading, things that are getting sparked while I'm reading a book or watching a video that I find is interesting. And it's just causing me to think, and I'm engaging with it in some way. And I'll write those down. Then what I do is on a regular basis, I'll come into my Obsidian inbox and I'll process those literature notes into permanent notes. Sometimes I'll craft a permanent note out of a piece of literature, and sometimes I won't. Like earlier with the, if you caught it, the Simon Sinek one that I was looking at, there's a permanent note here. I know it. It's just not coming right now, but sometimes I won't even craft that. So what I am doing here, generally what I do, so I'll come back to those literature notes at a later point in time, trying to process the ideas in there into permanent notes in my vault. So that's kind of the workflow that I have there. If a thought is blooming especially quickly and fleshing out in my mind very quickly, I'll write down more thoughts in my literature notes that could eventually merge into a permanent note in the future, but generally I keep that process kind of separated out. Brad's asking, do you always include topics in both the literature notes and the permanent note? I still struggle with wiki linking over tags when I'm not going to create a page. Yeah, I do. I mean, the way I think about tags versus links is tags are more for kind and status of a note for me. So you can see in my tag pane over here, I have literature, permanent, video, planning, book, article, to process, incubating, to do, TV, which is from a TV show, and then webinar, from webinar. So these are all like kind, which is literature note, permanent note, video, is from videos, books, articles, just to kind of delineate the source, and then status, to process, to do permanent as well. And then I tend to think of anything that has topical context, that needs to be a link in my vault. Excuse me here, I'm going to take a drink. So tags are for more tagging context, or where tags are more for my reference as to what kind and status, and then links are more for the topical context there. And that came from an earlier version of Obsidian for me, where tagging was not a part of the knowledge graph. You can see over here that you can see tags in the knowledge graph now, or maybe you can't see over there because I have my video there. I'll move this tab over here. Actually, just move it in the middle. Why not? So open this note. So yeah, previously you didn't have these tags here inside of Obsidian, inside the knowledge graph, and so I was treating them differently than I would maybe potentially now. But having the delineation between what I use tags for and what I use links for has helped me use them throughout time. So yeah, wiki links for topics and for linking between specific notes, and then tags for me for kind and status. Hopefully that helps you clarify a little bit how I use the software. If tagging's working well for you for topical stuff, definitely continue to use it, especially now that the tags are inside of the knowledge graph. There's really not a huge difference between the two other than the fact that you don't get backlinks from tags. So that's kind of one of the reasons that I use tags or wiki links, is that I get the backlinks. If I go in and I link something and I don't create the page right away, but I come back to it later and maybe create it, I can then see those backlinks or even the unlinked references, and so that I can start to link those words into different notes too. That's kind of the general overall organization philosophy with that I have for Obsidian. So let's see here. Heading back to this note, I suppose I should bring these back to where I had them so I actually use it. Okay, I think that I'm going to consider done for now. Walking makes us happier. And then okay, I think I have that one in my root too. Okay, I think that's okay. Cool, I'm glad that helped, Brad. All right. That one's incubating. This one's to do. I think I'm going to leave that one for today. I'll title this one, though, Asynchronous. Synchronous versus asynchronous work. This one I'll come back to and flesh out to be a little bit more robust. But this would be a good permanent note in my system, I think, even though it's not from a specific source. I think it would be a good thing to have, especially published, because this is something that I'm passionate about. And then we'll do incubating for now on that one. Well, I'm going to wrap up the live stream here in just a couple of minutes. If you have any other questions about Obsidian or the productivity workflows that we talked about today, be sure to drop them in the chat. As well, I'm going to drop the Discord link in the chat as again, if you haven't had the chance to join up there. We have a new Discord community that we are checking out and kind of experimenting with it. So there's the link in the chat again. If you are interested in joining that, please do. If not, that's okay. We have a forum as well over at community.effectiveremotework.com. I appreciate all of you hanging out and asking questions today. And if you don't get a question, if you have one that's not answered, you can either head over to the Discord community or over to the forum and feel free to ask it there. I'm always kind of hanging out, and if I don't answer it right away, I will answer it at another point in time. Oh, hey, Wilson, thanks for joining up. Glad to see you on here. Wilson is somebody who's been hanging around the effective remote work community for quite a long time. So yeah, he's done some writing for me too in the past. So good to see you. Glad that you were able to join up for this. But yeah, that is going to wrap it up for today's live stream. I'll plan to do another one next week. Again, remember, we're going to do remotely working the podcast on Wednesday afternoon, so that should be on the channel already if you're interested in joining up for that one. Am I using the block reference feature? I thought that feature from Rome was cool, but now that Obsidian releases this feature, I still don't find many use cases. You know, I'll be honest with you too. Yeah, I haven't found an extreme use for it inside of Obsidian. I think that's partly because I've adjusted my mindset and my workflow in using Obsidian. So previously, you know, when I was monkeying around in Rome a little bit, it just kind of naturally happens because everything is a block. Everything's a block reference, and so you're trying to figure out how can I link these little tiny pieces of information together. It's extremely granular. But then when I moved to Obsidian, obviously block references were not available yet back in March or April of this year when I was exploring around with it. And so I had to rethink the way that I was taking notes. And then eventually it really started to click for me that I didn't need block level references nearly as much. And the reason being is that Obsidian works really well with atomic notes. And so if you can take atomic notes where you focus your note in one kind of core area or a core topic, and then you can link to other notes that spread out into other topics, then I think it works really, really well, and you don't necessarily need those block references. However, if you notice, if you were on the stream earlier, this current system structure pulls in a graph, a Mermaid.js graph that I made from another note. Put this together in our last week live stream, but it pulls it in using a block reference. I think it's really helpful that if you're referencing a snippet of text from somewhere else in another note, that's really handy. Like if you have a specific quote that you want to pull out without necessarily block referencing or linking the whole note there. I think that's really helpful for that. But you know, generally the way that I'm handling notes now inside of Obsidian is to try to keep them as atomic and evergreen as possible, and then linking those notes together by idea, overall concept, versus the little tiny blocks that are there. That's kind of the thought process that I've had there. Well, I'm going to end the live stream now. Thank you everyone for joining so much. I appreciate it. Again, hit up the Effective Remote Work Discord community. Hit up our discourse community at community.effectiveremotework.com as well. We're hanging out in both places. We're thinking of chat as the kind of short-term ephemeral interaction similar to these live streams, and then the discourse community as kind of our long-term memory. If you have stuff that you want to share or have long-term discussions on them or develop workflows over time, head on over to that community too. Anyway, thanks for watching today.